There we go. I had to consent.
Thank you, Senator Stevens. Thank you for joining us here on Marcy's Law's interview series, Why We Do What We Do. First of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that it was actually 40 years ago this coming Thursday, November 30th of 1983, when Marsy Nicholas, who's Dr. Henry Nicholas's younger sister, was coming home for Thanksgiving, was home for Thanksgiving in California. She was a senior at the University of California, UC Santa Barbara, and she was stalked and murdered by her ex-boyfriend on November 30th of 1983. And less than a week after that, right after the funeral service, Marcy's mom, Marcella Leach, and family was confronted at a market when they went home after the funeral service to pick up a loaf of bread by their daughters, by Marcy's murderer. They had no idea that Marcy's murderer had been released on bail. They had no notification from the judicial system. And you can just imagine that trauma layered on top of the trauma that family had just been experiencing. Dr. Henry Nicholas decided there was something he wanted to do, and he wanted to do something about it and change the judicial system for the better, and specifically to try to help victims and families of victims of violent crime. And he started Marsy's Law. And it was about 15 years ago now, in 2008, in November of 2008, when Marsy's Law first passed in the state of California. And Henry Nicholas, who's the founder and chairman of Marsy's Law, which is passed now in 12 states, including California, said this. He said, if any good can come of something this horrible, the loss of my sister and the losses of other families of crime victims, it is that these violent acts serve as a catalyst for change. And he said Marsy's Law will provide for a more compassionate justice system for crime victims and make it a constitutional guarantee, which is the key. It puts it and enshrines victims' rights and survivors' rights in state constitutions. So he started that in 2009 after it was passed, and it was after it was passed in California. Like I said, it's now been passed in 12 states across the country. We now have active efforts in other states, including your state of Tennessee. I want to first thank you for being the person on the state Senate side to introduce this, along with your colleague on the House side, Representative Patsy Hazelwood, another champion for victims' rights like yourself. And you introduced Marsy's Law in 2021, January 2021. So we're coming up on 3 years. So this is certainly not some kind of hasty decision made by the people of Tennessee or the state legislature. So with that as an intro, I want to just thank you again, Senator Stevens. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in public service in the first place, and where you are in the state Senate and some of the committees that you serve on.
Sure. Well, thank you, Peter, for giving me the opportunity to address this very important issue. I began as a intern in the former governor's administration, and worked then with that same governor for several years, and then went on to law school, but always remained involved in policy and politics. Shortly after the census in 2010, Tennessee redistricted our districts, as we're constitutionally required to do, and so we had two different state senators representing my area, and then we just had one, and so the incumbent just decided to not run again. And I'd been approached as someone who had been involved. I was a practicing attorney at the time, and had been involved in politics, and was approached by one of our congressmen and said, "Hey, I've never been in politics until I ran. You kind of have done a little bit. Would you be interested in serving in this open seat?" And so wasn't anything I ever thought about. I'd seen kind of how the sausage is made, and it wasn't anything that I was really enthused about. But frankly, I think a lot of us after 2001 and the tragedies of 9/11, we all felt a desire and a need to serve in some capacity. I was already kind of pretty much too old for military service, I think, at that point. And so I was wanting that opportunity to serve my country, serve my state. And so when that kind of came up, it was something I didn't even hesitate about. Um, and so I won that election in 2012. I currently serve on the Judiciary Committee, where I've served the entire time as a small town practicing attorney. I'm on the State and Local Committee right now as well, and then I'm on the State Finance Committee, which I'm the vice chairman of. Which in Tennessee, that also means that you're the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and so we put together, me and Chairman Hazelwood on the House side, along with two members of the House and Senate as well. We kind of help lead the discussions between the two chambers on the state budget and assemble that budget together each year. And so that really takes a lot of time and focus away from a lot of things. But, bills like this are important. And that's why I know myself and Representative Hazelwood are really honored to be able to carry this and update Tennessee's out of date victims' right constitutional provisions.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, Senator Stevens. It's now almost a quarter of a century ago, 25 years ago, in 1998, Tennesseans voted overwhelmingly. I think it passed the state of Tennessee with an 89% of the vote, where there was a constitutional amendment for crime victims' rights, passed as the Crime Victims' Bill of Rights. So I think a lot of your constituents would say, well, why do we need Marsy's Law then? What do you say to them?
It was done, and interestingly, it was sponsored by my predecessor. And so Northwest Tennessee's kind of always taken the lead on victims' rights. But the way that statute, or the way that constitutional amendment was crafted, it served its purpose for a time, getting the issue, and obviously the Tennesseans are supportive of the issue of giving victims more standing in the court systems or ability to be heard. But it's really not enforceable in Tennessee. It's really not a meaningful constitutional provision. And so what Marsy's Law, as it's been drafted and worked on over the last 2 years, 3 years here in Tennessee, it gives victims a more meaningful and enforceable rights within our constitutional system. It's not one that it's not going to supersede the victim or the defendant's rights. It's more to just elevate those victims' rights to more equal standing within the court system. And so the other thing it really does that I think is really important for many victims, the right to receive notices and some of the things that we're trying to do, some of them may not want to enforce those rights. They may not want to exercise those rights. And so what the bill or the amendment, proposed constitutional amendment, does is, in many of those sections, it gives the victim that ability to opt in. It's by request. When government, we don't want government to just be in a position to almost, I won't say re-victimize, but to, some victims may not want to enforce these rights. They may not want to be involved in the process, and where the current law, it kind of forces them into the process. We want to make clear that this is on victims, that they have the decision whether or not they want to exercise these rights or not, and which ones they want to exercise. And so there's a lot of the provisions have by request in them. And it also, like I said, it makes it so that gives that more meaningful, and the enforcement mechanism is pretty technical, but still, I think it's very important for families that have been through all kinds of different levels of victimization to decide for themselves what rights they want to have or what rights they want to enforce. They have them, We just want to let them have more say in whether or not to receive the different notifications and participate in that criminal justice system.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point for people who aren't familiar with the process to understand that this gives victims the option, but more importantly, it allows them to be notified so that they know of every court date, they know of every significant proceeding, and they can decide for themselves. Because a lot of times there's a lot of emotion involved for the family members and surviving family members in cases, and some of them may opt not to come to every single court proceeding and only come to certain. But the most important thing is that they know what is going on. They feel like they're included in the process. I know as a former prosecutor, I had all sorts of different types of families or victims who some would want to come to every single proceeding. And I would tell them, well, I think the only thing that's going to happen today is there's going to be some motions filed and the case is going to get continued, but you're more than welcome to come. And they would sit in the front row and it would take about 3 minutes and then they would leave, but they were happy to be notified and they're happy to be there. There are other victims and survivors, family members who would say, you know what, just let me know if there's going to be a plea or when the trial date's going to be and when I need to testify. And other than that, so it's just important that they know that they're kept informed. And as far as keeping people informed and being inclusive in the process, one of the things that I'd like you to talk about is how inclusive you have all been. And this is, once again, you introduced this in 2021. We're coming up on 3 years now. And you have brought all sorts of people to the table: law enforcement, defense attorneys, members of the trial bar, prosecutors, people in the victims' rights movement on the Senate side and on the House side, so that everybody feels that they've been included and their voices have been heard even before it gets to the ballot. Could you tell us a little bit about how that process works?
Sure. Yeah. It's with all uniform laws, which this isn't, this is a kind of a uniform law because multiple states, as you said, multiple states passed this. What works in one state doesn't necessarily work in another state. And so, because we each have different laws and different traditions and histories within our systems. And so it's been really important to get that feedback and input from the various stakeholders and to tailor this language specific to Tennessee's justice system. One of the things that's been really, really important is with the updated language, we're being very clear about juvenile proceedings being included. Tennessee has a long history, as multiple states do, but we make a lot of hearings in juvenile court. They're closed to the public. They're not a public because it's a minor child that's involved, and not all minor delinquency hearing proceedings are something that needs to follow that child around for the rest of their life being publicized. So we're trying to balance that protection of minor children, but also to give the victims the opportunity to be there in public hearings, because there are some juvenile proceedings that are open to the public. And so we just wanted to, again, clarify the statute to make clear that victims, when it is an open public hearing, they have an opportunity to be there. And so that's a unique thing within Tennessee, or multiple states have that kind of closed juvenile proceeding. But we wanted to, again, if the rights aren't clear, they're not really enforceable. So we wanted to get away from the kind of the general rights language that the constitutional provisions have now to more specific rights. And so they have more meaning and they're more enforceable by those victims, because you had, under current practice, kind of have a hodgepodge. It's all not really clear what the victim can do and when and where. And so this language is much more tightly drawn. And that was as a result of working with advocates for victims, working with the District Attorney General's conference, working with criminal defense attorneys, working with child advocates. And so by getting that input, you really have an opportunity to have large sales groups involvement with it. And so that, if there is, because as we have not really talked about too much, but Tennessee is a very difficult, really one of the most difficult constitutions to amend. Our process is very difficult to go through, and it takes a lot of time. And so you don't want to be, you don't want to have a language on the ballot that you've worked on for maybe 6 years, 10 years, and all of a sudden an unintended consequence comes up because somebody didn't have an opportunity to really weigh in on that issue. And all of a sudden it's a really big problem for, let's say a victims' rights group, or, the district attorney general's conference just couldn't comply with the statute without, very onerous demands upon the current system requiring additional funding. And that was kind of one of the things we ran into here in Tennessee is, the general's conference wanted to comply. They absolutely want to respect victims, but if they don't have the resources to follow it, then again, we're just going to pass something that's not really going to be meaningful or enforceable. So it's really important for everybody to have that say, so that we will have more confidence that if the voters of Tennessee put this in our Constitution, it's going to actually, the government's going to be able to follow through on allowing the victims to have these rights.
Yes, and I'm glad that you described the deliberative process that you all have been going through, the exhaustive, if not exhausting, process from your perspective, to amend the state constitution, because it is difficult to amend, like you said, any state constitution, and Tennessee's state constitution is no exception, and that is as it should be. And I think you give the confidence to the people that when they go to the ballot in 2026, in the case of the state of Tennessee, for Marsy's law, that they will have the confidence to know that you've thought through all these things, that you've brought in all of these partners, that you've included all of the stakeholders, and that this is something that will have some teeth in it when it's actually passed. One of the when you talk about what was passed in 1998 versus what we're trying to pass through Marsy's law, one of the things that there's no legal right now as it stands for a victim's family to be notified of the release, such as what happened back in Marsy's case originally in California, or to be notified of the legal proceedings and to be present. There's no legal enforceable right in Tennessee right now. I had on this interview series a woman by the name of Tina Gregg, a Tennessee woman whose daughter Brooke Morris was murdered by her ex-boyfriend and boss, and he fled the state. And Tina Gregg was not notified of that. She found out about that on Facebook, and that just can't happen. And these are the things that this law, these are the types of things that Marsy's law will be able to address and make the Crime Victims Bill of Rights updated so that the important protections for victims and their families actually has some teeth in it and are enforceable. One of the things that I talk about a lot is in the United States Constitution, there are over 20 individual rights spelled out in the U.S. Constitution for those who are accused of crimes. But surviving family members of murder victims have none, and that's in the U.S. Constitution. Can you tell us a little bit about how the process? Well, I just mentioned 2026. How the process works as far as where we are now and what steps, actually procedural steps, need to be taken before this actually gets to the ballot for the voters of Tennessee.
Sure, love to. And I may go a little deep, but I think it's important for a lot of people to really understand. It's good little civics lessons too. So the Tennessee General Assemblies it made up a House and Senate. The Senate has 4-year terms. House has 2-year terms. So every 2 years, it's an entirely new General Assembly, even though there's some senators who will still be members of the General Assembly. But so with that 2-year cycle, there is for example, we are in the second half of the General Assembly right now. Bills can be introduced as they were last year. And if they don't pass in the last General Assembly session, they're still alive this year and they can still be voted on this year in this General Assembly. So each General Assembly is 2 years. The Constitution requires 2 General Assemblies to pass any constitutional amendment. And so the current General Assembly will be in 23 and 24. The next General Assembly will be in 25, 26. So we have to pass the exact same language in both the House and Senate in one General Assembly, and then it has to be introduced again in the next General Assembly. And it has an even higher threshold to be passed at that point. It needs to be passed by a 2/3 majority. At that point, then it has to be voted on by the people when there's a next governor's election. And then the majority of people voting for governor, their vote counts. Not everybody gets to vote on the amendment. And so it's a convoluted process. And interestingly, Tennessee's Constitution was called by Thomas Jefferson, one of the best state constitutions for preserving liberty, and it's because of that difficulty in amending our Constitution and that high threshold to put things in there, because under our federal system, where the federal government doesn't have enumerated powers, states do, and so a lot of people don't realize state government can do a lot of things to you. And so having these strong constitutional protections in our Constitution, Tennessee state Constitution, protects people's liberties and rights. And so it is a very difficult process. Part of the reason why we're not already, when we first introduced it in 21, we'd hoped that we'd already have, this would be the second General Assembly, and then we'd be on the ballot in 26. But as the saying goes in the Senate, one of our former members used to say it all the time: sometimes you get there faster if you go slower. And we're seeing that play out. Here. We have a much better product that we are going to put forward to the voters of Tennessee with the current language of the proposed amendment.
Well, I can say on behalf of Marsy's Law that we at Marsy's Law appreciate all of the time and effort that you're putting in, because we're learning as you're learning as well. We're learning from you too, and from the people of Tennessee, and that's what makes this such a great process from state to state. Number one, because we get to hear their incredible, heroic stories, quite frankly, of people who are involved in the victims' rights movement. And then two, we get to see the devotion and the commitment to service from people like you and Representative Hazelwood and all of the great legislators that are helping to make this a reality. I've had the opportunity, like I said, to speak with people like Tina Gregg and Jill Walker and Joan Berry, all of whom are moms who have lost children to homicides in Tennessee. One of the things that I've noticed about the many accolades that you've received over the years is you were the Mothers Against Drunk Driving Legislator of the Year. So I want to congratulate you for that, but it also shows your commitment for people who are moms of victims whose voices are so important in the state of Tennessee, that you work with them and you've been working for them for many years.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's I fortunately, by the grace of God, haven't been a victim of criminal activity. My wife, as a young child, her first cousin was brutally murdered, and so she's seen that firsthand. And and then as an attorney, obviously, I work with victims and help them navigate the criminal justice system, which for most people, hopefully they never have anything to do with that. But for those who do, it's overwhelming. Just the process itself. There's a lot of confusion. Obviously, the worse crime there is, the more potential harm and pain and anguish there is going through that system that can just drag on in years and years and years. And so it's been something that I've fought for years, wanting to just one of the rights that's in here, I think, that we don't want to overlook is the defendant has a right to a speedy trial, but as we're making clear in this, so does the victim. Justice delayed is not necessarily justice at all. And so, while we want to be sure to make sure that the wrongdoing and that no innocent person is convicted, we also don't want to drag on in the process. So one of the things I did years ago, Tennessee was the only state in the country. We have a three-tier appellates, or we have a two-tier appellate system for crimes, and so we have a court of criminal appeals and then a Supreme Court for all death penalty convicted defendants. They had an automatic appeal to the Court of Criminal Appeals and an automatic appeal to the Supreme Court. Again, dragging out that system when really there wasn't meaningful oversight, because many times everything was just confirmed. So I passed a bill to remove that intermediate appellate court jurisdiction for death penalty victims to speed that process up. Now it doesn't speed it up much because it's a federal process as well, especially when you're going to take someone's life. But for victims to have to go through a largely perfunctory appellate system where it was duplicative, again, it's just really important that we get justice done as quickly as possible and correctly, of course, but we also need it to be done expeditiously.
Yeah, and I think the wealth of experience that you bring as an attorney also brings just a learned and respected and, quite frankly, extra credible voice when it comes to this particular kind of legislation, because a lot of times people will say, well, if you're elevating the rights of victims, are you necessarily taking constitutional rights away from the defendant? But as you've described, constitutional rights are not necessarily, they're not a zero-sum proposition. You're not
That's
taking any rights away. And the fact that you've actually stood at the bar and represented the criminal justice bar and represented defendants, I think brings a certain extra amount of education to people who are trying to learn a little bit more about the process, which is what's been happening over the last several years in Tennessee. And I'd like people to know that they can call you and call their legislator as the process goes on, and also go to Marsy's Law for Tennessee. That's MARSYS LAWFORTN.com, Marsy's Law for Tennessee.com, and you can volunteer and figure out how you can actually help and get your voice heard at the state capitol as well. And you're representing Northwest Tennessee, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and
it's the most diverse agricultural part of the state. But I have 8 counties here in Northwest Tennessee.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your continued advocacy for victims, for your partnering with Marsy's Law, and helping to get this important legislation passed and on the ballot for the people of Tennessee to vote on in 2026. And I also want to thank you for all of your volunteer work that you do in the community. I know you're also, you've been a Sunday school teacher, you've been a youth basketball coach, not just a lawyer and a legislator. So I want to thank you for being such a great representative of the people of Tennessee and such a great partner for Marsy's Law.
I appreciate it. And thank you for your continued advocacy on behalf of crime victims.
All right, and we'll be working together over the next several years. And thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you soon, Senator.
Sounds good.
Thank
wish
you very much.
Everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I may have just messed up the video for timing purposes, but that's the time of year we're in.
Oh no! Happy belated Thanksgiving and belated
right.
birthday and Merry early Christmas.
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Senator.
Take care.
Take care.